On debate, Senator Cordy.
Thank you, Speaker. Honourable Senators, I speak to you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I want to thank Senator Gold for the hours and hours that he spent answering questions today and maintained his composure throughout, and of course to his team, because for any of us, it's our amazing teams who are behind us. Honourable Senators, I'm honestly disappointed to be here today debating the confirmation of a public order emergency. But colleagues, if we as senators are not concerned by the recent events in Ottawa, in Coutts, in Windsor, in Surrey, in Toronto, and indeed in many places across the country, and if we do not act, we will have failed in our service to all Canadians. Our debate on this motion is most likely to focus on what happened here in Ottawa, as it was certainly the most egregious show of lawlessness perpetuated on city residents. Could the occupation of Ottawa have been prevented? Probably. Should the province have done more before now? We all saw the trucks driving to Ottawa. But in the absence of any meaningful action before last week, I do believe that the Emergency Act remains the only way forward. Let's be clear. The invocation of the Emergencies Act was the first real attempt to remedy the situation in Ottawa, and that fact does concern me. We know, for instance, that law enforcement successfully dealt with the blockade at the Ambassador Bridge without such measures, and successfully deterred protesters from occupying Queen's Park. But here in Ottawa, existing laws were not enforced for more than 20 days. And residents, quite rightly, felt abandoned by their municipal government and local law enforcement. I'm certain that the reviews and inquiries to come will enlighten us all as to why that was the case. I share the belief of many of my colleagues, and with Canadians from coast to coast to coast, that had these protesters been Black Canadians or Indigenous peoples or homeless peoples, that law enforcement would have been swift and quite possibly brutal. So let's think about that for a few minutes, honourable colleagues, or probably longer than a few minutes. There is no doubt that the emergency orders have made it easier for law enforcement to deal with the situation in Ottawa. The orders made possible a substantial increase in human resources from across the country. It allowed officers from outside the Ottawa Police Service to enforce existing municipal and provincial laws without a need to deputize. The emergency orders also allowed for the travel restrictions that finally prevented the influx of weekend demonstrators from overwhelming the downtown core. And the orders stymied the efforts of the occupiers to resupply their fuel and other provisions. The financial measures also made a difference by cutting off funds to resupply the occupation efforts. Over the course of this debate, we are going to hear about public opinion on the focus of the protest itself, as well as on the actions of the occupiers. We've heard it already in the other places, MPs engaged in vigorous debate, firmly planted along predictable lines. It is true that the Ottawa occupation has brought together diverse groups of peoples with a wide variety of grievances. Not everyone involved intended to cause such significant negative impacts, nor to harm their fellow Canadians. There were, however, many in downtown Ottawa who were significantly harmed, either financially because their place of employment was closed, or because they feared for their safety if they left their homes. Mask mandates, travel restrictions, and lockdowns have all been put forward as complaints, most having nothing to do with the federal government at all. In fact, if the reasons for the protest were what I just stated, they would have left when Premier Ford announced further reductions of the restrictions, because after all, that is provincial jurisdiction. But even if misguided, I firmly believe in the right to protest here on Parliament Hill, as so many have done over the years without incident. Before COVID, I would say there were protests every day of the week. But, honourable senators, a protest is very different than an occupation. But make no mistake, the original purpose of this protest, though it was cloaked as a protest about trucker vaccination mandates, even though we know that 90% of truckers are vaccinated, was clearly outlined in their own Memorandum of Understanding. The MOU was to have the Senate chamber and senators and the Governor-General replace the government with a committee of the occupiers' choosing. They planned to stay here in Ottawa until their demands were met. We all know that's impossible. We all know it's a preposterous suggestion that had no chance of succeeding. But that's not the point. Intent is the point. And, honourable senators, that should worry us all. Honourable senators, this was not simply a protest or even civil disobedience. It was lawlessness. And as Senator Saint-Germain said earlier in her speech, my staff also were harassed when they walked to the office wearing a mask, or when they walked to the grocery store wearing a mask. Much of the defense of the Ottawa occupation rests in the suggestion that it was nonviolent, that it was comparable to Canada Day, with inflatable hot tubs, bouncy castles, and a DJ. Sounds pretty good. I'm sure that it seemed that way to some, but most Ottawa residents would heartily disagree. Just because there was no looting, smashed storefronts, or widespread rioting does not mean that it was nonviolent. Violence is not just physical. It can be harassment, intimidation, stalking, and disturbing the peace. I've spoken with people who live in Ottawa, and I've listened to their stories. Downtown and Centretown Ottawa are home to some 25,000 people. More than 10% of them are seniors. And in the downtown area, most affected by the occupation, more than 15% of the residents are over the age of 65. They are not Karens, nor are they people with six-figure salaries who only work 20 hours a week.
Not senators.
According to the 2016 census, the median household income in Centretown ranges from $49,000 to $61,000 before taxes, depending on the specific part of the community in which they live. It is a vibrant, bustling neighborhood filled with shops, cafes, and people of all ages. And while downtown conjures images of government office buildings, it's also home to thousands of people. Ottawa residents don't think they're better than anyone else. They don't think they're special either. But no one should have to tolerate what the people in affected Ottawa endured for 24 days. Horns blowing at all hours of the day and night in front of homes, loud enough to hurt a person's ears, and certainly not allowing people to sleep. Fireworks set off right next to tall residential buildings housing families and seniors, homes reeking with the smell of diesel fumes, open fires and pigs on a spit in downtown streets, residents in masks being harassed and threatened, with some even being assaulted for refusing to remove their mask, attempted arson in one residential building, and mischief at the doors of another by attempting to lock the doors from the outside, power and water cut in a number of residential buildings after break-ins to their mechanical rooms, 911 phone lines being overwhelmed by calls and attempts to thwart law enforcement. That, honourable senators, is a disgrace. Journalists were harassed, spat on, and physically attacked while on air. And for those who believe that the threat is over, the Rideau Centre was evacuated today due to an incident. Businesses were swarmed by people refusing to abide by what is the provincial mask mandate. Businesses that have already suffered through so much of this pandemic and were looking forward to decreased restrictions after the last lockdown, including restaurants opening for indoor dining, had to close their doors because of the occupation. The Rideau Centre, the fourth busiest shopping centre in Canada, was closed for 3 weeks, losing tens of millions of dollars in revenue and putting 1,500 people temporarily out of work. And of these 1,500 people, most would have been minimum wage workers living from paycheck to paycheck. Honourable Senators, that doesn't sound like a Canada Day celebration to me. Rampant lawlessness made the downtown core a scary and a dangerous place for many who live and work here, and especially for Black, Indigenous, and people of colour. And no matter the pride and feeling of ownership that Canadians may have in their capital, Ottawa remains the permanent home of 1 million people. It is their city. Downtown Ottawa is not just office buildings and Parliament Hill. Real people live here. Centretown is a diverse and vibrant community. Real people live there. The market, bustling and lively. Real people live there. Entire neighborhoods have been occupied, and residents just want peace and quiet. They do not want this to happen again, here or anywhere else. And, honourable senators, neither do I. Ultimately, honourable senators, our rights, guaranteed under the Charter, come with responsibilities. Personal choices have consequences, and the rights of individuals do not supersede our communal rights. And to those who think that extremist sentiment is isolated to a few occupiers in Ottawa, I would ask you to spend a few minutes on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok and examine the more extreme elements lurking there. There is no doubt that we as a nation will have to have some very serious conversations about this in the future, the very near future, I would suggest. Honourable Senators, I understand that Canadians are frustrated. I understand that their lives were upended by COVID. And we all want things to return to normal. We're all tired of this pandemic. I'm as tired as anyone, and I recognize the privilege that I do not have to worry about my job. It's been 2 very long years. But even now, Canadians are overwhelmingly not divided. Millions of Canadians have come together to do what needs to be done in the face of an unprecedented crisis: getting vaccinated, following public health advice, and looking after the most vulnerable among us. They are the silent majority, persevering through adversity and doing what they must for the benefit of their fellow Canadians. Honourable Senators, we must continue to work together, just as we have all along. And together, I am certain that we will emerge on the other side. These emergency measures are temporary. They are subject to parliamentary oversight, and I believe appropriate to the situation at hand. And that is why I will be supporting the motion that stands before us. Thank you.